Okay. Welcome to Facebook Live. It's Saturday morning, and as usual, can we hear? Yeah. Yes. You might be wondering why I'm wearing a face mask. Well, we normally do our Facebook Live from our showroom in Pershore, but for the first time ever, we're out and about in the community. Now, we're actually doing this live from a customer installation close to Loch Lomond in Scotland. And we're delighted to be working on the machine here, building the frame, and we're going to talk to Anne, who's recently purchased this Amara, lovely machine behind me here, and we're going to talk about some of her quilts and quilting. So welcome to everybody, anybody who's joining us from wherever you might be in the world, either watching it live or on catch-up later. Welcome to Pinhole Quilting. So Pete's behind the camera, I'm Liz, and this is Anne. So
good morning, Liz.
Brilliant. So, Anne, tell me a little bit about your quilting journey and how you started on machine quilting.
Okay, so I started quilting in 1996 when I moved up here, and I didn't know anyone. And one of the ladies in the office took me to the Helensburgh District Quilting Group.
Right.
That was a very active group, and several times we had tutorials or classes, and so I did some machine quilting, okay, some stitching in the ditch.
Yeah.
And
on a domestic machine?
On a domestic machine, yes. And I had several classes with Sheila Nuki with the Helensburgh District group. And then over the years, we've gone to shows various, bought different machines, done different quilts. But then I came to the Edinburgh Knitting and Stitching show about, was it 4 or 5 years ago?
I think that was probably the first year of Pinhole Quilting, 2017.
2017, yeah. Where I met you and Pete, and you had a number of machines. And that's when I first saw the Sweet 16, which I'd only ever seen in a magazine before, in an American quilting magazine.
It was there in Edinburgh.
Yeah, suddenly it's there. And I quite liked it, and we talked about it. And I came home and I said to my husband, Tony, I'm sure if you'd have been there, we'd have bought it.
It would have been in the car.
It had been in the car. My husband's a bit of a gadget man, and it was the sort of thing that would appeal to him.
Yeah, brilliant.
So we talked about it, and we bought it, and it came up, and I've had that for, I didn't realise it was quite so long, 4 years. So I've had some success with it. I have done some quilts with it. In the beginning, I didn't really know what I was doing. And then there was the Longarm Quilting Academy in Bristol at the Aztec Hotel, where I met you all and your tutors, Kelly Klein, and Kimmy Brune. And I had, was it 4 days of sit-down classes, ruler work, free machine quilting, and I learned so much there, both from the teachers and the other ladies, because again, there isn't really a group of long arm quilters up in.
No.
You know, there isn't a big group here.
It certainly at that time in 2018, it was quite widespread as well. The number of people that who'd got either sit down or stand up long arms.
Yeah.
So
and that, I have to say, that was a super weekend. Everyone was really friendly, learnt lots. There was a shop. There was fabric.
The shop was quite busy. Yes,
I remember you said, you didn't know what to bring, so you bought everything.
Yeah.
And we bought everything.
Yeah.
I remember that was your sort of parting words. Yeah. So that was really good, and I learnt a lot. And I came back and I did a lot more on the machine.
Yes.
And also I could realise what mistakes I'd made before I'd had any tuition. But the other thing as well was I hadn't really realised how much was on YouTube. And there's Kelly Klein's YouTube channels, and the other lady that does the graffiti.
Yes, Carly Porter.
Yes.
Who does the graffiti quilting.
And then, once you start looking for those sort of videos, you come across other videos like Helen Godden. So,
yes, you kind of go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
To be honest, yes.
And Angela Waters. And I have to say, there was a period of time when I just watched those YouTube clips every evening. So anyway, but the other thing at the Academy was you had the long arm machine set up, and I had a go at those. And we had an evening where all the long arm quilting machines were set up, and I think you were trying to demonstrate to me the echo feet and the couching feet, which I was interested in. But when I realised how light touch the machine was, I said, I don't know why I haven't got one of these. So, but obviously, I had the Sweet 16.
Well, I should say in the background we've got Tony, the husband of Anne, who's part of all this decision making.
So anyway, that was after the academy, and then I noticed that you were going to be at the Alexandra Palace Knitting and Stitching Show, which I'd only been to once before in London, but was absolutely terrific because of the variety of things and also the variety of companies that don't always come up to Scotland, because sometimes we are limited in Scotland about which manufacturers or which craft people come to Scotland. I said to my husband, Pinhole Quilting are going to be at the quilt show at Alexandra Palace. Will you come with me and look at the Longarm quilter? Will you come? Anyway, this was quite difficult because it was also the same weekend as some, important matches in the Rugby World Cup.
Yes.
So he was rather a pressed man, and I was given a very limited time slot between 10 o'clock when the show opened and when kick-off for the first match was going to be televised. But however, we did both go, and you were there, and you talked us through the machines and the software and showed us the samples, and I think it's fair to say you were won over.
Yeah, a seed had been planted.
A seed had been planted, yeah, a seed had been planted. So obviously, unfortunately, I think that's the last show we'd been to for a while. That was 2019, wasn't it?
It was.
And obviously 2020, no shows. And again, although we went to the Glasgow Creative Stitches show in February, again, no Longarm manufacturers go to that one. So, and then obviously I've been in touch with your Facebook group, Longarm Quilting Curve, and watching your Saturday morning YouTube clips. But also, I always scroll through the used machines. My Sweet 16 was an ex-demonstrator, and I saw that you had the Amara, and we talked about it. And Tony said, well, if you want it and we can afford it, you can have it.
Fantastic.
So here we are today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it arrived on a pallet on Wednesday, and now it's set up.
Yeah, and this worked out really well because, at that Edinburgh show, which was the first time we'd ever really exhibited the Handi Quilters in Scotland, we also had some other customers that we're now going to be seeing en route after we've seen yourself. En route, we sort of stopped off and did a few other customers too. So it's been a really nice sort of thing to be able to visit you and other people as well. So that servicing and being in touch with other customers is really important. But let's just talk a bit more about your quilting, because it's quite clear from coming into your home, which is lovely, that you've got a lot of quilts. And over the years, you've sort of tried out different techniques. So why don't we have a look at some of those? We can show people what you've got.
We're also interested in machine embroidery. This was a joint project, so with my husband, the machine embroidery work. Deliberately did this one. We'd had some decorating work done. And so our embroidery machine was sort of covered up and out of the way. So we deliberately did this project to get it up and running.
Yes.
And this is one of the first ones I want to quilt.
That's
Which
it.
way is up?
So you need to the other way.
Oh, no.
That's it. If I take this end,
Yeah.
probably should.
So this is just
Yeah.
a red work alphabet quilt. I haven't put the borders on yet, but
This is lovely.
This is quite interesting at You Live and Learn. We doubled the size of the pattern, but not the stitch density. So having started, we finished, but we have learned something from that experience.
Yeah. So ordinarily, if that was half the size, if it was 50%, we would actually have
a
quite
bold,
dense satin stitch.
But as this is only going on a chair in the lounge, we decided we'd finish it.
Yeah, I think it still looks absolutely lovely, and I think the fact that the red work is it's so beautifully crisp, isn't it, within the cream blocks? But the designs are absolutely gorgeous. I love the teddy. Yeah. I know you're big into teddies, right?
Yes, and I mean like this, and obviously we've got the chicken as well.
Yeah,
but
there's chickens outside and ducks.
I have to say I really like red work, but I'm not quick enough by hand.
By hand, that's
this
a
would be
very big, long project, isn't it?
Lifetimes.
Yes, it is.
But
okay,
so that's one of the.
I'm going to put these over the back here.
Okay. So I mentioned before I was a member of the Helensburgh District Quilting Group, and over the years there've been numerous guest tutors. This one came out of a Catherine Gourier workshop on scrap quilting.
Right. Now, and if you come forward,
Sorry.
I'll hold this at the back. Oh, there we go. We'll swap over.
Yeah. So this was one, a scrap quilt one, where obviously she was talking about the values of the fabric, light, medium, dark. And we did, on the day, I did 2 9-patch squares.
Yes.
And I came home and showed Tony, and I have to say I don't think he was overly impressed.
This was what I did.
Yes. But then I did another 98 squares, and then we've got this whole light and dark sort of pattern.
Yes.
So I have actually stitched in the ditch with this on the Sweet 16, but it is very big to manage.
It's big, and you've got some lovely wadding in here. It's just like is it Hobbs heirloom? Or,
yeah.
So I mean, it is quite heavy, isn't it?
It's quite heavy.
A big quilt like this on the Sweet 16 is doable, but you're going to find it a lot easier now you've stabilised it. You could baste each of these blocks as you go, and you could put it onto the frame with a super clamp and some easy clamp grips. So that will work really well, and then you'll be able to do the border and stuff. You can rotate the border so that you can do it in one section at a time.
I think I've got a stencil of Christmas trees and stars, which I fancy having around the border.
Oh, that'd be lovely.
I haven't got to the border yet.
Yeah, and the thing about Catherine Gourier really is that sort of teaching about having value, and it's not just about obviously the designs of the fabric, because you've used a huge variety of Christmas fabrics here, but it's about getting that value so that you create the design and this lovely centre, and it just comes out. So, yeah. So
there's a couple of things. If I see Christmas fabric, I kind of have to have it, and then you end up with a lot of Christmas fabric that doesn't kind of match. So this was ideal.
Yes.
And the other thing,
from that point of view.
If I'm making a quilt, I like to make a big quilt. I mean, if I'm watching something or I look at a pattern and it's, I don't know, lap quilt size, I immediately think, how can I make that bigger?
Yes.
I think it might be because sometimes it's quite cold up here in the winter.
Yeah. It's nice to snuggle under a quilt. There we go. You can have that one.
So that's that one.
Now we can put this one. So, yeah.
Oh, I'm quite pleased. This backing, this was a sort of bargain bucket end of roll in John Lewis, but it just...
it's really nice.
I was really chuffed when I found that that one. Again...
Yeah, that's worked really well, hasn't it?
I kind of find it a challenge to try and make a large quilt with... my bargain buys.
Yeah, and to use up those sort of those purchases that you've made in a way that makes the best use of that fabric. And with a Christmas quilt, that's perfect.
So this is another example of a bargain bucket find. This is specifically for the conservatory.
Oh yes.
These were a sort
cute.
Of end of roll cushion panels. Again, I've stitched in the ditch.
Yes.
But I wanted to do something a bit more interesting on the border.
Yeah.
This is before I even had the Sweet 16. It's been hanging around. So I did try these.
I've used these, all borders made easy with domestic.
Yeah.
This is quite a good solution where people haven't got maybe a long arm and they're using the domestic machine, isn't it? Because you can actually do this you can do it with a walking foot.
Yes.
Rather than, that's what I did with a similar cable.
Yeah.
So this is still on here. And presumably, when you actually put it onto the long arm, you're going to be taking this off, or will you use this as a guide?
I don't know. You can stitch through it. I think I'd probably try and be a bit more ambitious now I've got the long arm. But
that's going to be fun to do. This kind of quilt is a really good way to get to know your long arm as well, because it's not too big and it's quite different. You can take inspiration from the fabrics, and maybe just sort of see how you go with, sort of quilting around things and stabilising it. So
So this is another example of where I've just got a collection of things and sort of made it up as I've gone along.
Yeah.
And there are somewhere some matching cushions, which...
So this will be your quilt and cushions when it's finished.
Well, it's supposed to be for the conservatory. But my children probably have grown up by the time I've
this is the kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm the same with the idea of doing them as children's quilts, and they end up being at university before they're finished. But hopefully with your Amara,
pass me the
these
funnel.
are all I'm looking forward to seeing these. Oh, I love this, and this
So
is
this-
interesting, isn't
This
it?
is a bit of a lockdown project. So in 2019, we went to the Festival of Quilts.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a bit wrinkled, this one. Festival of Quilts. That's the first time I'd heard of or met or seen Jenny Dunn from the Missouri Star Quilt Company. And I was fascinated with her talk. I love working with flannel. And at the time, there weren't some very, the sort of more muted palette was all that was on sale. But I used her apple core
it's a big
template.
apple core template.
Yeah, to get the best use out of my flannel, because sometimes it's quite difficult to get flannel in this country.
It is.
I like not to waste any.
We don't have quite the selection of flannel.
But I have to say it was quite a challenge, because you do need to match up the centres.
Yes.
And ease them in.
You do. And for anybody who's never tried apple core, I've done a quilt with apple core. If you've never tried it, obviously the point is that the bias and the stretch varies, but it's actually quite stretchy on some of these sections. But you've done a fantastic job of matching these up. It's really well done. But I have to say, excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it is. That is the biggest challenge about apple core. But I mean, what I loved about when we were talking about this earlier was the fact that where with Missouri Star, they quite often take things like layer cakes and say, right, how can we make the most of that fabric? Rather than just having a quilt design and then saying, okay, well, you could use this layer cake. It really makes best use of a 10-inch piece, doesn't it?
I have to say, I'm not a sort of person, I can't just scrap these together. So I had these laid out on our bed, trying to work out, if I've got, if I've got the browns, I've got the 3 browns together in a corner, and I've got the whites, and I do fiddle about quite a lot in the layout.
Yes.
I can't just.
So you're doing this? Did you do that on a bed, or do you put that up on a wall and stand back?
No, I haven't got a wall, but I usually take the duvet off our bed and do it on the mattress. But I have to, and then I have to. I have actually sometimes now. I actually move the machine into the bedroom when I'm piecing them, so I can just piece them.
Yes, in the right order.
In the right order. Sometimes I find by the time I've taken them to the machine and then got them back, they're in a completely different order.
I've been there, done that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So sometimes I just move the machine in there.
Yes.
But I'm quite pleased with that. But
lovely.
this purely came out of that talk at the Festival of Quilts, and I thought I've got to try those. Those templates.
And some of those the YouTube videos that Jenny Dunn does. There's just so many now that you can actually watch and just learn so many different techniques. And Missouri Star has really done an incredible job, haven't they, with keeping people going through lockdown.
Yes, I have to say I have looked forward to that, because there's been no other quilting activity, no shows, no interaction. I have to say, Friday evening when I finished work,
that was your go-to.
That's nice. I have enjoyed it, and I think as well in the early part of the lockdown, the Missouri Star recognised that, didn't they? They did the masks, and almost felt it was like she was addressing the nation at one point. But
it was an important role to fill, really, because people were not always a bit afraid of the future. So actually having something distracting that you can really immerse yourself in, that's where quilting and crafting has really come into its own, which is why it's been so popular.
So this one I've deliberately left to do on the frame.
Marvellous.
So this is actually.
Have you thought at all about what you would do on this, or are you going to wait until it's sort of closer to loading it?
I think I'd like to have a curved pattern, probably echoed.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm toying with the idea of not having a brighter colour, like a red or something, an orange. A bit like the sort of denim yellow. But then I'd have to be doing it quite well. So
yes, and but one of the other things to say on something like this, have you got any fabrics left over from this quilt that when you were piecing, you've got any excess, or is this everything on the quilt?
This is pretty much everything. Yeah.
Because the other thing to think about is that if you do a quilt like this, where you might want to do something quite experimental, if you have got some scraps, put them together, then do some trying out, testing that thread that you're thinking, well, that could work well with red or yellow, whatever it is. Yes. Actually try it out before you do it on your quilt.
Yeah, okay.
Because you can't always tell.
No, can't always tell.
No. And some threads will actually sort of really sink into the fabric, and others you want them to actually shine, so you don't want that effect. So yeah, always Leah Day always says test, don't guess, and I think that's with something like this, it would be really interesting
I've certainly got some scraps I can have a go with.
I would recommend that.
I do plan to make this into a quillo, so I have done a cushion front as well for it, because obviously we won't be, we'll sit under this watching the TV in the winter, but not in the summer.
A perfect winter quilt.
but as I say, I don't normally use such muted fabrics, but I just love flannel.
Oh, it's lovely. It's really lovely.
And this is the other reason why I wanted to go to Longarm, was the stand-up machine.
Yes.
Is I love using flannel, and sometimes I put fleece on the back, and that is just too much for me to pull through the machine. I mean, I can do it. It's
a big quilt.
But on a big quilt, that's a lot of weight to manage.
Yeah, and it's weight, and of course, as we discussed earlier, it's actually because if you've got fleece or something with a bit more, like a bit of adhesion to that, even with the Sweet 16, that table, it still does have a little bit of stickiness to it.
Yes.
So, and when you come to loading things like that, like say if you decide to go minky on the backing for this, you don't want to stretch them too much.
No.
So, if you need some tips and stuff, long arm learning curve when you're loading those quilt backings can be a useful thing to have some input from people who've done it.
Right, okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So sorry, I should have ironed that earlier. And then I do have this one. My mum went to the States again. This was some time ago. My mum went to the States, and I said, which is up? Which way is up? Yeah, so is that way up? No, this way. Is it this way? Can't remember. Anyway, my mum went to the States, and she bought a book, picked these fabrics, and said, "I've got you some quilting fabric."
What a lovely mother you've got.
Obviously, I did this before I knew anything about strip piecing, and I can't remember what happened. I had it laid out on the bed in the spare room, and I think somebody came to visit, and I put it in a box, and it's never come out. So when my mum came to stay with us last summer, and we sat down here, and she put it all together in order, a bit like a big jigsaw puzzle, and I sewed it together.
Lovely.
And she's quite pleased to see it finished, but now she wants to see it quilted and hung up.
Yes.
So again,
it's a good one to get onto Amara, actually, because it's very manageable.
Yeah.
But also, I think you've got some fabric left over that you can make another one.
Yeah. There was quite obviously. I think we've got fat quarters of every single fabric here.
You see, if you had say you had two of those, what you could do is you could load them side by side. So you load your backing and your wadding, put that on top, and then you could actually stitch. You could actually attach each of them simultaneously, side by side.
Yes.
And you could either quilt them the same so that they're identical, so your mum has one, you've got one.
Or
whatever you like. But that's quite a good way to do a smaller size quilt like that you can actually load the wider wadding and backing. It saves doing two lots of loading.
Yes. No, I like that idea. Yes.
Okay, great.
And then this one. This is, I think, the last one. This one, I did this one. I did buy a Grace frame. We bought it from Pemberton's in.
Oh yes.
We had a little 2-seater car, which we were enjoying, and we went out for lunch and that. And what happened was 2 weekends in a row, we went out for lunch, and we had to go back the following weekend with the proper car to pick up what we bought when we'd been out in our 2-seater car.
It's when you need the tail lift van that you might know you've gone a bit over the top.
But so we went out for lunch in Stirling and came back with a
amazing.
But this one was the one I tried to do on the Grace frame, and I have stitched in the ditch.
Oh, I think you might need to move this one. Sorry. If you come out this way.
I have stitched in the ditch, but I would like to do something a little bit more ambitious with
there's huge potential for long-arm quilting.
Yeah.
These big spaces are exactly what you're going to want.
But
I love that.
So again, I've got plenty of unfinished projects
Yes, I think that, I mean, this is what we need. You know, you've sort of saved up these for when you got your long arm on the stand-up frame.
As I say, it was a bit of, again, I think I'd have got on better with the Grace frame. Even now, I get on better with the Grace frame. Now I've been to Longarm Academy.
Yes.
I was just following the book, really.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I think when we bought the Grace frame, there wasn't a YouTube.
There wasn't.
No, there wasn't that sort of support.
No, exactly.
So
yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that something like a frame and using a long arm, with all the educational resources we've got now with YouTube, we can do so much more. And as individuals, you've got access to all of that history now.
I didn't know anything about rulers or anything. So,
well, rulers were relatively. I mean, we got the Grace frames at Cotton Patch when we had rulers came in. But even so, it wasn't until we got those deeper feet, like the Surefoot, that you get the confidence, because you know that if you slip, it's not going to cause a problem. You're not going to get it caught under your needle and that kind of thing.
So there's a lot of love for this quilt.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yes, and Di has suggested that feathers would look fab on this.
No pressure. No pressure. Well done, Di.
I've got in my picture.
Yeah, so what Pete was saying there, I'll just repeat what he said, because people might not have heard how much love there is for your quilt, and the fact that Di has suggested how nice feathers would be on this quilt, and I'm just saying no pressure.
No pressure.
So, Have you tried feathers much on your sit down?
I have practiced, but not on an actual quilt.
Okay.
I have, if I'm on at work, and obviously we're all doing work over the phone.
Yes.
I do doodle a lot now, so I've doodled a lot of feathers.
The benefit of doodling.
Yes. No, I'm a big fan of the log cabin, because quite often I like, if I've had a difficult day at work, sometimes I just find the routine of putting the log cabin together is quite stress busting.
Yeah.
But obviously, once I've got it in this position, I have found now that clearing a space on the floor big enough to layer up the quilt, and as I say, I do like to do a big quilt, finding a space on the floor big enough to layer up a quilt this size, tape it, crawl around on my knees, then do the batting.
Yes.
I think I did one for my mum for Christmas, and I thought, no. Never again.
So this is interesting. So you've actually pinned this. Is it sewn at all? Yes, you have.
Yeah, I have. I think the backing has gone a bit yellow. I think it was on the frame the Grace frame for quite a while. The backing has gone a bit yellow in places. Yeah. But this, as I say, this is my first attempt. It's not good on the Grace, and also I don't think I had the bottom fabric stretched adequately.
So this is something that I think it's worth just mentioning, that if someone does get a long arm and they've done the quilting, you've got two options. You can continue as it is, and you can put it on two rails, but you have to be very careful, because obviously if the back hasn't been particularly tight, keenly basted, i.e. the gap between the basting stitches, or however you've secured it, is quite wide, you've got the potential for having flaps and tucks and stuff. The other thing you can do is what people call skinning a quilt, which is actually to remove that backing.
Yes.
And in this case, you might want to do that because it's such a beautiful quilt.
Yeah.
You actually might be better to do that, because you will get a much better final result by then putting this onto the rails separately and layering it up on your quilt frame instead. It's up to you, but there are those two options. And I
think I agree with you, because I don't know what I've used on it. I think I might have used some old sheet as well, which is why it's gone a bit yellow.
Yeah, and that's another thing, is that actually if you do feathers on here and you've got beautiful Amara, it will you will be able to get a lovely stitch on this. And you've got a mix of the stitches that you had on your previous frame and then the Amara. It's going to show more. So it wouldn't take you long to get that backing off.
No.
And I think that's probably a good investment.
No, I think, to be honest, this has been in the things to be done pile for so long. I'd almost forgotten about it. So
it's a voyage of discovery sometimes, isn't it? I've done that before now, and I've opened a box that's been lovely, beautifully labelled, and I think, what's in there? I open it up and it's like all the quilt blocks, all just sitting there, ready to be pieced.
But no, I think I probably will. We'll probably unpick that. That's the sort of when you're watching a TV job, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And there are, again, long arm learning curve. There are some people who are very good at skinning a quilt that can give you some tips as to how best to achieve that. So
that's great.
Those are the kind of bits of experience that other people can, give you. A bit like how you said on Academy, it wasn't just about, Kelly and Kimmy came with a huge amount of experience, but actually in that room of sit-down quilters was vast amounts of experience in different areas from each of those people who were there as well.
Yes, and that was lovely. I mean, it was nice to be in that environment where we all had that same interest.
Yeah.
And, I did feel as a sort of fairly novice long armer. Some people, some of the did take me under their wing a bit and talk
which
to me.
Which is lovely. But actually, I mean, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about how, we had to cancel last year's Academy, but we're looking. And as soon as we can get more information from some of the venues as they're opening up and the staff are coming off furlough, we'll be investigating the best places to go for the next Academy. And our plan is to do one in 2022, subject obviously to any other setbacks that we might have on the COVID front. But, if we can do it, we will. And it's for us, it's a real, certainly for Pete and I, it was a fantastic experience of bringing all of those quilters together. Both stand up and sit down, and bringing in those high level teachers that otherwise it's very difficult to get.
I think the other thing was as well, I went on my own, and sometimes sometimes over the years you get fed up of going to things on your own. But it was one of the few residential things I've been to on my own where I didn't feel on my own.
Right. Nice.
It was a very social, friendly atmosphere, so I enjoyed that, and I would go again.
Brilliant.
So, Anne, you're not the only one who does doodling in work. There are various other people, and somebody even went invigilating exams.
So when someone's invigilating exams, that's
and there's a request about the leaf wall hanging that somebody loves. Do you know the name of the pattern for that one? Can you remember the name of the pattern?
I do. When you're winding up, I'll go and get it.
We can add it to the Facebook Live afterwards.
I can do that.
Because we'll save that.
Yes,
it'll go on YouTube. And...
It came from a book. It's a lovely book, and I think it's one of those rare books where every single pattern you would like to do.
Yeah.
That's so nice. I've got some Walmart fabric that we bought last time we were in the States, fat quarters, which isn't as lovely as some of the cotton fabrics, but there's a couple of patterns in there in that book which I would probably use that up for again. Warm brush cotton.
Yeah, lovely.
Sorry, I lied. There was one more. I think.
Okay. What was the? Oh yes.
I think it's worth mentioning this. This isn't my pride and joy, but this is the one I naively, before I went to the Longarm Academy, tried to do on my Sweet 16.
Right.
And I think it's probably worth sharing what I learned about this one.
Yes, that's great. No,
okay. So many years ago, before we had our new central heating boiler, when we just moved into this house, my husband and I were huddled up watching TV under a Quillo, the standard Lynn Edwards Quillo-sized flannel quilt.
I love it.
And Tony said, "Can we not have one slightly bigger?"
Right.
So... and I wanted
it the edges, basically. It wasn't big enough to cover you. Yes.
So we were huddled up. So I went to a show. I think it might have been a Quilters Guild thing, and they had this flannel, and I thought, "Oh, that's perfect, bright colour." And I found this pattern, and I put it together and squares and fiddled about. And as I say, I always like it big.
Yes.
And then I wanted to put fleece on the back, so it was warm. Mm-hmm. Okay. But actually trying to quilt this on the Sweet 16 as a first project was a bit of a nightmare, because it was very heavy. This isn't very slippy.
How heavy it is.
But I wanted something that we could all sit under and watch TV in the winter. So it was quite heavy. And the other thing was I found it very difficult to mark the quilting on. I've tried pounce pads and the markers, and I did find it quite difficult. I had a stencil. And then
this is your stencil I can see in the border.
Yeah, and the other thing was I didn't do it continuous, so each one of these has a start and an end.
Yeah.
And the final thing was I used a variegated thread, which was far too busy for this busy fabric.
Because it was already a busy quilt.
Yeah.
So
I've learned a massive amount.
There you go.
And it's still not quite finished.
But it's all part of that sort of continual process, really, of learning.
Yeah.
And it is a question of sort of just going for it, really, because the next quilt you do that is a busy quilt, you will pick a solid that is the colour that you want to emphasise. So and that holds it all together.
So I think, although my intention is to finish this quilt, obviously, it won't be going in any competitions. But
this again would be a great one to finish on your Amara. So I think that's going to be perfect. You'll be able to just put that onto the rails, clamp it in place, and do sections at a time. And do some free motion quilting to perhaps join it in between the blocks that you've already done that are stencil quilted. So really good.
And the other thing, because once, I was a bit horrified about how to deal with all the ends when I realised how many I had. But again, at the Longarm Quilting Academy, Kelly Klein explained how she did her quilt ends.
Yes.
I have sat in front of the TV and done quite a few of them in the odd evening. But no. So, as I say, bit of a lesson learned, this one. But obviously, again, because of the weight, that's why I wanted to go to the stand-up.
And because you are, as you say, you're a lover of the bigger quilts. So, it is something that's going to be easier. Now you've got a 12-foot frame.
Yes.
This will be much, much easier. Yes. There's a whole roll of wadding back there.
Yeah.
So we know that there's lots of quilting going to be going on.
Yes.
Well, listen, I really appreciate, both Pete and I really appreciate you spending some time and just showing some of the quilts that you've got that you're going to be working on. But also, really hope you enjoy using your machine. We look forward to seeing your progress on Facebook. So thank you very much.
No, and thank you for coming up to set it up and give us some tuition. We've been looking forward to it. It's the highlight of our week, really, I think. So thank you.
Lovely. All right. Well, thanks very much. And we look forward to seeing everybody on Facebook Live next Saturday. We will be back. In fact, it's going to be Facebook Live in the morning. In the afternoon, I'm doing a class myself on Zoom. I'm taking part in a class which will be all about drafting patterns. So, continual learning for all of us. So have a fantastic week, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks then. Bye-bye.